Just after midnight, a brief announcement appeared on official feeds. All land border crossings between Poland and Belarus are closed until further notice. No speeches, no fanfare, only a single sentence that instantly reshaped Europe's security map. Within minutes, barriers dropped across the frontier. Searchlights swept the darkness as customs gates locked and heavy arms lowered. By dawn, a ribbon of headlights stretched for kilometers on the Belarusian side. For thousands of travelers and drivers, this was not abstract geopolitics. Parents with sleepy children sat in idling cars. Truck drivers leaned on their cabs, phones pressed to their ears as dispatchers tried to reroute deliveries. Work appointments, hospital visits, and family trips dissolved into uncertainty. Warsaw explained the move as a matter of national security, citing weeks of rising tension. Drone incursions from Belarusian territory, large joint military exercises known as Zapad 2025, and unusual electronic activity near the frontier. Officials stressed that the closure was defensive, not provocative. Yet explanations offered little comfort to those stranded at the gates. What had been a daily routine, crossing for work, shopping, or visiting relatives, suddenly ended. And for Belarus, a country whose economy depends heavily on trade with the European Union, the implications were profound. By sunrise, the disruption was unmistakable. The main Brest-Tiraspol crossing turned into a miles-long traffic jam of trucks, buses, and private cars. Engines idled, horns blared, and documents fluttered against windshields, but no one was moving. Belarusian freight companies faced immediate crisis. For years, the Poland route had been the fastest, most cost-efficient way to reach EU markets. Now carriers were forced either to park their rigs or to take far longer detours through Russia, routes that doubled both distance and fuel costs. Even before the closure, fuel prices across the region had been volatile due to refinery fires and export restrictions. Every additional 100 kilometers now meant higher expenses and tighter margins. Insurance premiums climbed overnight as underwriters priced in the new risk. The human impact spread quickly. Supermarkets and gas stations across Belarus filled with anxious shoppers stocking up on essentials. Though no real shortages existed, the perception of scarcity drove prices higher. Medicine and imported goods became objects of quiet panic. The Polish side felt aftershocks too. Border towns lost the daily flow of shoppers and workers, and local airports rerouted civilian flights around restricted airspace. Yet Warsaw judged these costs acceptable compared to the risk of a security breach. Economists call this a behavioral economy effect. Fear of shortage creates shortage. Long lines at gas pumps and grocery stores reinforced the anxiety, even where supplies remained adequate. The immediate financial fallout was sharp. Belarusian exporters of perishable goods, dairy, fruit, fresh vegetables, were first to feel the pinch. Shipments bound for European supermarkets stalled in freight yards. Factories waiting for electronic components and precision tools faced sudden delays. Construction sites reported shortages of steel, wiring, and other imported materials. Freight companies struggled with the math. Routes that once took a day or two now required a week via Russian corridors. Extra distance meant more fuel and higher labor costs, while volatile Russian energy markets made budgeting nearly impossible. Insurance firms raised premiums, and some carriers demanded advance payment before moving any cargo. The financial system felt the strain as well. Importers needed more foreign currency to cover rising costs, but foreign exchange earnings fell as trade slowed. Belarus's central bank encouraged the use of Russian rubles to preserve reserves, exposing businesses to new exchange rate risks. Polish communities near the border also faced losses. Shops and small hotels depended on daily cross-border traffic, but Warsaw deemed the sacrifice manageable. National security, leaders argued, outweighed the economic discomfort of a few towns. For multinational corporations, the event became a cautionary tale. Supply chains that rely on predictable land routes across Eurasia learned how quickly a geopolitical spark can disrupt billions of euros in trade. Beyond spreadsheets and shipping schedules, ordinary Belarusians felt the crisis in daily routines. Families who regularly crossed into Poland for groceries, fuel, or family visits suddenly had to rethink basic errands. Parents worried about running out of prescription medicine. Grandparents feared they might not see relatives who lived just a few hours away. Hospitals braced for shortages of critical drugs and diagnostic equipment sourced from the EU. Although substitutes existed, changing suppliers required time, and quality or price often suffered. Education links suffered too. Exchange programs with European universities were postponed, and students faced uncertainty about scholarships and certification transfers. The psychology of scarcity set in quickly. Lines formed at gas stations even when fuel supplies were adequate. Shoppers bought more than usual, pushing prices higher simply through demand. Economists call it a feedback loop. Fear of shortage creates real scarcity. The government responded with its usual two tactics: control and narrative. Officials ordered inspections of warehouses and imposed temporary price caps to prevent speculation. At the same time, state media emphasized that the crisis was driven by external hostility, not domestic policy. But television slogans could not fill empty shelves, and quiet frustration grew. Many Belarusians value stability above all else, but stability becomes fragile when daily necessities feel uncertain. Sociologists warn that such quiet tension can build unnoticed until a small trigger, like a local school running out of milk, pushes it suddenly to the surface. For Russia, the sudden border closure created more problems than opportunities. Belarus has long served as one of Moscow's key levers of influence over the European Union. A transit corridor for goods, a pressure point for migration, and a political partner willing to amplify Moscow's messaging. All three levers weakened the moment Poland's gates shut. Economically, the closure disrupted trade routes that Russia uses to reach European markets now restricted by sanctions. Rerouting freight through Russian ports and internal railways added cost and congestion, undermining claims that the Russian economy could easily adapt. Migration pressure, a tool occasionally employed to test EU unity, was also blunted. A sealed border eliminates the spectacle of large groups of migrants suddenly appearing at EU checkpoints, a tactic previously used to strain neighboring countries. Politically, Moscow condemned the closure but had few practical responses. The incident showed that NATO could act swiftly and collectively, countering the Kremlin's narrative that Western defenses are slow and disjointed. Meanwhile, Belarus's growing dependence on Russian financial support may look like leverage, but it also forces Moscow to spend more resources to keep its allies stable. China watched closely as well. Its Belt and Road Initiative relies on this corridor for fast overland trade to Europe. Any erosion of reliability weakens Moscow's claim to be a secure Eurasian bridge, adding another layer of pressure. The immediate trigger for Warsaw's decision was not economic, but military. Weeks before the closure, Polish radar tracked repeated incursions of unidentified drones crossing from Belarus into Polish airspace. Several were identified as Russian-made reconnaissance or attack models. For Polish officials, these were not navigation errors, they were deliberate tests. At the same time, Russia and Belarus were conducting Zapad 2025, a large joint exercise featuring heavy troop movements and complex electronic warfare drills. The combination of live fire training across the border and drone flights into NATO territory set off alarm bells in Warsaw. Poland and NATO reacted rapidly. Polish F-16S and Dutch F-35S scrambled to intercept intruding drones, while NATO's airborne early warning aircraft and tanker planes formed a wide patrol network. Patriot missile batteries in Germany were placed on high alert, and several drones were shot down. It was one of the fastest joint responses ever seen on NATO's eastern flank. Soon after, the Polish government launched Eastern Shield, deploying nearly 40,000 personnel, border guards, mechanized units, and support staff, to reinforce the frontier. Sensor networks, layered barriers, and continuous patrols turned the border into a fortified zone. Neighboring Lithuania and Estonia tightened airspace restrictions, underscoring regional solidarity. Within Poland, opinion polls showed broad support for prioritizing national security over cross-border commerce. The incident highlighted a larger reality. In a world of hybrid threats, a few unmanned drones can halt billions of euros in trade and rewrite strategic calculations overnight. Far from Warsaw or Minsk, the effects of the border closure rippled through Asia. China's Belt and Road Initiative relies heavily on a fast rail link that runs from Chinese industrial centers through Russia and Belarus into Poland, before branching toward Germany and the Netherlands. The Brest-Milosevice crossing is the critical gateway for this traffic. Before the shutdown, as many as 20 to 30 long-haul freight trains, each roughly 700 to 900 meters in length, passed through daily, carrying electronics, textiles, auto parts, and other goods. When the gates closed, dispatchers scrambled to reroute shipments, demurrage fees and storage costs mounted by the hour as trains idled on Belarusian tracks. Experts warned that congestion could soon block local rail traffic entirely. Alternative routes existed on paper, shipping through Russian ports to the Baltic, using a southern middle corridor via Kazakhstan and the Black Sea, or shifting entirely to maritime freight. Yet each option involved higher costs, limited capacity, and longer transit times. Global container shipping was already under pressure from fuel price volatility and port congestion. For Beijing, this was more than a logistics headache. It struck at the credibility of China's overland trade strategy, which depends on reliable, low-cost delivery. Chinese exporters faced late deliveries and strained relationships with European clients, while European manufacturers reliant on just-in-time supply chains confronted costly delays. Despite quiet Chinese diplomatic outreach to both Warsaw and Minsk, Poland's security concerns left little room for compromise. As one European diplomat observed, security trumps cheap freight every time. Inside Belarus, President Alexander Lukashenko's government faces a pivotal choice. The economy, already fragile, now depends more heavily on Russian trade routes and financial aid. Deeper reliance on Moscow could bring short-term relief, but risks turning Belarus into a de facto economic province of its larger neighbor. Opening discrete channels with the European Union might relieve economic pressure and allow for a monitored humanitarian or commercial corridor. But that path carries political risks. It would require transparency and cooperation that hardliners in Minsk and Moscow could view as betrayal. Ordinary citizens watch these moves with a mixture of pragmatism and unease. Official inflation remains moderate, but the cost of everyday essentials feels higher. Real wages lag behind prices and quiet frustration grows. Surveys already show a rising interest in emigration, and subtle signals, such as increased use of encrypted messaging and foreign currency purchases, suggest slipping confidence in the government's ability to maintain stability. The administration has responded with familiar measures: temporary price caps, selective subsidies, and tighter media control. These steps may buy time but cannot replenish dwindling supplies or rebuild trust. Belarus thus stands at a delicate intersection: lean fully toward Moscow and sacrifice autonomy, or cautiously seek limited engagement with Europe. Either way, the country faces an extended period of economic strain and social tension. The consequences of Poland's decision extend well beyond the immediate neighbors. Across the Baltic states, governments tightened surveillance and reviewed contingency plans, aware that similar provocations could test their own borders. Lithuania and Estonia had already imposed partial airspace restrictions during the height of the drone incidents, reinforcing NATO's united front. Within the European Union, leaders debated how to balance solidarity with Poland against the economic cost of a prolonged closure. While manufacturers and freight operators faced delays, Brussels largely supported Warsaw's stance that collective security must override short-term trade losses. Several member states began quietly investing in alternative transport routes, from Black Sea corridors to expanded maritime shipping, to reduce reliance on the Belarus-Poland gateway. Washington also took note. U.S. officials praised NATO's rapid coordinated reaction as a textbook example of alliance readiness against hybrid threats. The episode became a case study in how drones and military exercises, without a single shot fired, can disrupt critical infrastructure and global supply chains. In Asia, Chinese logistics planners recalibrated risk assessments for the Eurasian rail network. Although maritime routes remain available, the event highlighted the vulnerability of overland freight to sudden geopolitical shocks. Other trading nations, from Middle Eastern energy exporters to Southeast Asian electronics manufacturers, quietly reached the same conclusion. Stable supply chains depend on political predictability as much as physical infrastructure. For global markets, the lesson is clear. Economic logic can be overturned overnight when national security is at stake. A few unmanned aircraft and heightened military drills were enough to halt billions of euros in commerce and force a re-evaluation of Europe's transport map. Looking ahead, the critical question is not just when the border will reopen, but under what conditions. Polish officials insist that traffic will resume only when they can verify long-term security. That stance has broad domestic backing and strong NATO support, making a quick unconditional reopening unlikely. Belarus now faces limited choices. Negotiating a monitored humanitarian and commercial corridor with the EU could ease economic pressure but would require transparency Minsk has historically resisted. Alternatively, deeper dependence on Moscow offers immediate financial lifelines while reducing national autonomy. A third scenario, prolonged stalemate, would gradually erode living standards and test public patience. For ordinary Belarusians, the stakes are personal: access to medicine, affordable fuel, and stable prices. For Europe and Asia, the closure underscores how tightly security and trade are intertwined. And for the global economy, it is another reminder that supply chains are only as strong as the political stability of the routes they follow. If you value balanced, fact-driven reporting on critical world events without political spin, subscribe to our channel MGE. Thank you for watching.